All right, so we're diving into the world of René Descartes. And I know what you might be thinking, oh boy, I think, therefore I am. Here we go.
It's the quote that gets all the attention.
It really does, but
Hmm.
I have a feeling there's a lot more to this guy than that one little phrase.
Oh, absolutely. Descartes is way more than a one-liner. What's fascinating to me is that he didn't even start as a philosopher. Born in 1596, he actually studied law, traveled around Europe as a soldier.
Wait, really? A soldier?
Yep. This wasn't some armchair philosopher. He was out there experiencing the world firsthand.
Okay, that's a pretty wild background for a guy known for his deep thinking. So how does someone go from battlefields to, like, pondering the nature of reality?
Well, there's this pivotal moment in his life. It's 1619, and Descartes has these incredibly vivid dreams, almost like visions.
Intense dreams, I've had a few of those. Never
Yeah.
quite changed my life, though.
Well, for Descartes, these dreams were a turning point. It's like they sparked this insatiable desire to uncover truth, to find something certain in a world that often felt anything but. And you have to remember the context. This is Europe during the Reformation.
Right, when everything people thought they knew about religion and authority was being challenged.
Exactly. It was the perfect breeding ground for questioning everything. And that's precisely what Descartes set out to do. He spends the next 20 years, mostly in the Netherlands, intensely focused on his philosophical work, and it all culminates in his masterpiece, Meditations on First Philosophy, published in 1641.
Meditations on First Philosophy sounds intense. But before we get there, let's talk about this whole Cartesian doubt thing.
Ah, yes, Cartesian doubt.
Because honestly, it sounds a bit intimidating. It's like he went on a mission to just systematically doubt everything he possibly could. His senses, the world around him, even his own existence.
It's a radical approach, no doubt. He called it methodological skepticism. Basically, a systematic way to dismantle any assumptions, any truths he might have blindly accepted before. He started by questioning his senses. Could you really trust your sight, hearing, touch? What if they were deceiving you? Then he questioned the external world. What if it was all an illusion? He even entertained the possibility of an evil demon, some kind of deceiver manipulating his perceptions.
Okay, whoa, now that's getting a little matrixy for me.
I know, right? But that was the level of scrutiny he was working with.
But seriously, what was the point of all this doubt? Was he just trying to make everyone question their sanity?
Not at all. The goal wasn't to wallow in doubt, but to use it as a tool to clear away any shaky ground so he could rebuild on a foundation of absolute certainty. And this is where his most famous idea comes in. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am.
It's a phrase that's echoed through history. But how on earth do you go from doubting everything to that statement?
That's the beauty of it. Descartes realized that even in the act of doubting, there had to be something doing the doubting. The very ability to question his existence, to even conceive of the possibility that he might be wrong, proved that he, as a thinking entity, had to exist. To doubt is to think, and to think is to exist.
Wow. Okay, my brain's doing a bit of a workout here, but I think I'm following you.
Yeah.
So it's like saying, hey, if I'm questioning my own reality, there's got to be a me doing the questioning in the first place.
Exactly. That realization, that undeniable presence of his own thinking mind, became the cornerstone for his entire philosophical system.
Okay, that alone is mind-blowing. But then Descartes takes this even further with his idea that the mind and body are separate, like two totally distinct entities somehow coexisting.
That's right. And that's where we get into his theory of mind-body dualism, a concept that has generated endless debate for centuries.
And still does.
Oh, absolutely. Descartes drew this really clear distinction. On one hand, you have the mind, which is immaterial and responsible for all of our thinking. And then you have the body, which is physical and subject to the laws of nature.
Okay, but hold on. If they're completely separate, how do they interact? I mean, otherwise it's just like we're all floating minds, totally disconnected from the physical world, which doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun.
It's the million-dollar question. Descartes himself was fascinated by it. He proposed that the pineal gland, this tiny structure in the brain, acted as the point of interaction, the physical location where the mind and body could communicate.
Interesting. I mean, obviously modern neuroscience has moved beyond that specific idea.
Oh, for sure. But what's important is that Descartes framed the question in the first place. How can something non-physical, the mind, interact with the physical world? It's a question that still fascinates and challenges neuroscientists today. And believe it or not, we're just scratching the surface here.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. We haven't even gotten to his argument for the existence of God.
Wait, what? Hold up. So we've got a philosopher who seems to put a lot of faith in the power of reason, but then he turns around and tries to prove that God exists. I'm not sure I'm following that logic.
It might seem counterintuitive, but remember, Descartes was all about exploring where reason could take us. He wasn't afraid to follow a logical argument wherever it might lead, even if it meant reaching conclusions that seemed paradoxical.
Yeah, I'm all ears. Let's hear it. How did this champion of logic and reason make a case for the existence of God?
It's called the ontological argument, and it basically boils down to this idea of God as a perfect being.
Okay, I think I'm following so far.
Hmm.
But how does our concept of a perfect being, just the idea of it, automatically mean that it has to exist in reality? It's not like just imagining something makes it real.
That's a great point. You're right. Just because we can think of something doesn't mean it pops into existence.
Right. Like I can imagine a perfectly organized sock drawer, but that doesn't mean it's actually going to happen.
Exactly. The sock drawer, sadly, remains a dream. But here's the key difference when it comes to God, according to Descartes. He argued that the very concept of a perfect being, we're talking a being possessing all perfections, that concept had to come from somewhere. And since we, as humans, are, well, inherently imperfect.
We are definitely not perfect.
Definitely not. He argued that we couldn't have just conjured up this idea of perfectness on our own and be like, imagine a bucket of water overflowing even though it's only half full.
Okay, that's a weird image, but I get it. There's got to be a source for that extra water.
Right. So Descartes is saying our very notion of perfection points towards a source of that perfection outside of ourselves. It has to be coming from somewhere else. And for him, that source was God.
So our flawed human minds couldn't have come up with the idea of perfection unless there was already a perfect being out there. It's a pretty mind-bending argument.
It really is. And, it's an argument that has been debated for centuries. Some philosophers find it incredibly compelling, while others see holes in the logic. But that's what's so great about it. It makes us wrestle with these fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, the limits of reason.
Descartes definitely knew how to get those mental gears turning. But it's interesting, we've been talking about a guy who delved into some pretty abstract philosophical ideas, but he also made these groundbreaking contributions to a field as concrete as mathematics. It's a fascinating contrast.
Absolutely. It's easy to forget that Descartes wasn't just a philosopher. He was a brilliant mathematician who revolutionized how we think about geometry. In fact, he's often called the father of analytical geometry.
Analytical geometry.
Okay.
Okay, I'm suddenly feeling like I'm back in high school math class, hoping I don't get called on. Can you break that down for me? What is analytical geometry?
Basically, Descartes figured out how to connect geometry, which is all about shapes, to algebra, which deals with numbers and equations. Imagine a grid, like a giant piece of graph paper. He realized you could represent shapes on that grid using equations.
So instead of a circle just being a circle, it becomes a set of coordinates on a grid defined by a specific equation.
Exactly. And it might seem kind of simple now, but it was a total game changer. It's called the Cartesian coordinate system, and it allowed mathematicians to study geometric shapes in a whole new way. It paved the way for all sorts of advances in math, from calculus to things we use every day.
Wait, seriously, what do we use that came from Descartes' work in math?
Pretty much all computer graphics are based on it. Even the GPS navigation system in your phone relies on those principles that Descartes developed.
Wow, I had no idea my phone was secretly channeling 17th century philosophy. So not bad for a guy who spent years holed up, pondering the nature of existence. He tackles these huge philosophical questions, then turns around and revolutionizes math.
It really shows the power of a curious mind. Descartes is a great example of how deep thinking and concrete problem solving aren't mutually exclusive. They can actually fuel each other.
And his impact goes way beyond math and philosophy. I mean, we're talking about a guy who helped usher in the Age of Enlightenment.
Absolutely. That era when reason and individual inquiry took center stage.
Right. And Descartes' emphasis on the power of reason, on questioning everything, that resonated deeply during the Enlightenment. It's like he gave people a philosophical framework to start challenging authority, questioning dogma, and really seeking knowledge for themselves. It's amazing how the ideas of one person centuries ago can have this ripple effect throughout history, and those ripples continue even today.
They really do. And that's the heart of why studying someone like Descartes still matters. His ideas weren't just revolutionary for his time, they're still shaping how we approach knowledge, truth, even our own consciousness.
So it's not just about understanding I think, therefore I am, but about understanding what that statement represents, the journey he took to get there, and what it sparked in terms of philosophical inquiry. It's like we've been on this whirlwind tour of Descartes' brain, and now I'm curious, What was the biggest takeaway for you? What really stuck with you after this deep dive?
For me, it's that feeling of being empowered to question things. Like, we don't have to just accept things at face value. We can dig a little deeper.
It's like he gave us permission to hit the pause button,
Yeah.
to step back and say, hold on a second, let's examine this a bit closer before we just go along with it. And it's not about being a skeptic for the sake of it, but about being an active participant in how we understand the world.
That's exactly it. And it ties into his ideas about the mind-body problem, which still boggles my mind even after all this time. I mean, think about it. Neuroscience is making incredible strides. We're getting closer to mapping the physical processes of the brain.
We're basically catching up to Descartes.
Right. But that question of how those physical processes translate into subjective experience, into the feeling of what it's like to be you or me, that's the mystery.
It's the million-dollar question.
And it's one that continues to fascinate philosophers and scientists alike. That's what I find so amazing about these big questions, even if we don't have definitive answers. The act of wrestling with them,
Yeah.
exploring different angles, that's where the real magic happens.
It's about the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of engaging with a thinker like Descartes. He might not have had all the answers, who does, really? But he dared to ask the big questions, challenge assumptions, and really push the boundaries of human understanding.
He was a total trailblazer, not just in philosophy, but
Yeah.
in math and science. His fingerprints are everywhere.
Yeah.
And what I find so inspiring is that he reminds us that this pursuit of knowledge, this journey of discovery, it's not some exclusive club. It's open to all of us.
It's about cultivating that sense of curiosity, that willingness to question, to explore, to always keep learning. And, who knows, maybe, just maybe, by embracing that spirit of inquiry, we'll uncover some new insights, new perspectives that'll shape the world for generations to come, just like Descartes did.
What a great note to end on. So, to everyone listening, as you go about your day, keep that spark of curiosity alive. Don't be afraid to question, to challenge, to explore. Who knows what amazing discoveries you might make. And that wraps up our deep dive into the world of René Descartes.